Hi, everyone. First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be in a room full of brilliant and massive bastards. I feel at home here, so thank you very much for having me. I wanted to talk a little bit about my practice, and already I'm hearing so many themes that converge with what's already been discussed. And I talk about this notion of polarities within my practice and exploiting the gap between all kinds of polarities. But I'm going to talk a bit actually about some of my practice and where that sits and how I feel as an artist and thinker even. So this is a statement that I don't often make, but because we're all bastards, I'm going to share it here with you today. I'm an artist as entertainer, performer, jester, conjurer, storyteller, historical hoaxer, information swindler, and conceptual charlatan. And essentially that means you can't trust anything I have to say. But hopefully you might be able to, because I'm going to be totally honest, of course, with you here today, that some of this will sort of resonate. And one thing I do within my practice is explore, as Ginda kindly presented me as saying, about history. And we've talked a bit about history already from the speakers, and looking back into the canon of history and seeing where people such as myself situate within that canon of history and whether we're even in that history. And I kind of make that history. I fabricate that history that's needed. But as well as being a conjurer and all that kind of thing, I'm also a fat, opinionated female lesbian from Essex. And that, apparently, by definition, makes me cumbersome, unrefined, and requiring of caution. And just when I was thinking about this talk today, that's sort of how I feel on a personal level. So already, I'm definitely a massive bastard. But also, as well as being a bastard in that respect, unlike Craig, I can say that word lots, I also have an Irish heritage, and my maternal grandfather was an Irish traveller, and one of the things that I was bestowed with apparently was being able to kiss the Blarney Stone. So I'm clearly very good at bullshitting, apparently from a very early age, and this is something that I've encompassed within my practice. But as this sort of court jester, I like to play. I like to tell these anecdotes, stories, and have aspects of magic and mystery, spectacle, and also provocation. And there's something about the sort of symbolism of the court jester. You know, and often historically the court jester would be something of another, but would somehow seemingly sit within, you know, the royalty, the courtroom, and be able to push buttons on all kinds of aspects of that society. And you could do enough to piss off a king, but still be funny. You could play between truth and fiction and touch boundaries that somehow you wouldn't ordinarily be able to do without potentially endangering your life. So there is elements of the sort of self-deprecating we talked about earlier within my own practice, laughing at myself, laughing at others as a way to traverse this awkward territory. And I think there's a context as well to that situation that allows some kind of immunity from the social consequences, those boundaries that I try and push. And so the idea of humour and fiction and over-exaggerated storytelling that I always deliver with a poker face creates the hook. And in fact, I was kindly invited to Mac a couple of years ago to speak about my practice, and I see that even speaking about my practice is an opportunity to perpetuate the myths that I create, and that's something I did here. So if you happen to have been here before, I apologise. So here's an example of some of my practice. I made a body of work called Fishwives, and this was taken from this tall story that I created because for me, aggression and mutual violence between women is something that happens for me, and something I wanted to explore, where, you know, this sort of, you know, how can a woman be aggressive? And how can a woman kind of push these boundaries? And as a female lesbian artist, that I'm constantly arguing with somebody. And I created this story that from this island, you know, in Italy somewhere that I found on Google Maps, that historically women would come together on this feast day and hit each other and flagellate each other with fish until a victor was decided. And this was a performance that took place in London outside a gallery. Myself and my partner, who suffers literally and in all kinds of ways. And we had a performance where we came together in a street in South London, outside a gallery space, and a fight ensued, like a street fight. It was very serious. Mel, my other half, I broke her ankle in the process. It was that serious. But this was accompanied with an operatic aria sung by a fantastic opera singer coming to opera that we were talking about earlier, and that elitism. And I wanted to challenge the audience between how can I deliver something as Monty Python slapstick, but actually say this is a real historical thing that happened. And how can I create a tension and awkwardness with the audience? And that it really worked. The fact that I managed to hospitalise my partner was testament to maybe some of that, but also this idea of truth and what we assume to be truthful and what we assume to be bona fide and legitimate, because we assume through this infrastructure of elitism, our concepts of history and science, not many people really challenge this idea. And amazingly, even this myth turned up on Wikipedia, and which shows that through this sort of falsehoods can actually become truth. And I think, in fact, it was Goebbels who said that if you lie often enough, it will eventually become a truth. It took a Nazi to say that. But here's some more images from this performance that became this very violent thing, where, again, how do you manage that as an audience, as someone who just happens to be there, and the audience reaction was actually, I had a big place on my face during this point. You know, the audience here outside the gallery there was a tension, there was an awkwardness. Are these people? Is this happening? No one was aware that it was going to happen. It was all pre-planned. Fairly local to Billingsgate, which was good. But there was this, you know, the accompanying of this operatic aria, you know, this assumes this gravitas to this situation. So here's one of my ways of exploring this oddness. And in fact, I would say that, and I would articulate that my practice sits within what I would call a fault line, an intersection between two or more divergent elements. And in fact, comedy and satire, which is something that's within my practice, sits within that fault line. And in fact, traditionally, satire was designed to critique two opposing themes and press those buttons. And when we see comedians, especially, will play against those boundaries and will veer up and down this line. And there's something that magical that happens there. Those contrasts, anxieties, contradictions and tensions. And for me in my practice, that unresolved, awkward element creates this effective hook within my practice. Time as a concept and history as a concept, and in fact here said in Hamlet, time is out of joint. And I love this concept of something being dislocated and not fixed and maybe slightly broken. And this is something that was going through my mind when making a body of work called Strange Birds, where I, again, added to, or tried to add to the canon of history, the concept that animals, and animals is a theme that crops up too, because they've got that marvellous, you know, democratic value that happens with animals, that I only just want to be an animal in order to be imbued with so much strength and from nature. And as humans, we're so, you know, just knackered. But this idea that pigeons would somehow, in history, this was found by some scientist somewhere, the pigeons were able to determine a human sexuality just by observing them. Kind of like an early post-war gaydar if you like. And this is something, again, I tried to posit as a thing, that by a pigeon that can look at you and would actually peck a box of seed that would say gay, straight, question mark, whatever. And that this was something during a time when homophobia was so rife, but there were lots of interesting conversations going on in science. We've got the age here of Alan Turing, and the decriminalisation of homosexuality that happened in 1957. So I pitched it in this time again to play with these ideas in a very serious way by providing a very serious archive of information that went along with this image of me and this pigeon hooked up to electrodes. And here's a sort of an installation from that work where simultaneous images were showing to really kind of provide this, bona fide archive of scientific materials that, again, supported this concept. And indeed, people do talk about it and take it as read, and I have to go and apologise to people afterwards. But I'm also interested in this bit of poetry by Osip Mandelstam, Russian poet, in 1922, where this, for me, this wonderful analogy, coming back to creatures and monsters, as Gary talked about at the beginning, this wretched beast with a broken spine. And it's actually, this poem is called The Century, or The Age. And I love the idea that this animal with a broken spine is sitting between two centuries, two polarities, and is looking back. And how does someone with a broken spine turn round and look back and look forward? And for me, this wonderful metaphor happens of this break in the spine as being this place of that moment. It's not the past, it's not the future, it's somewhere in the contemporary where something exciting and magical happens. And this is a body of work that I'm dealing with at the moment, which is an extract of completely absolute bollocks of scientific fact that lesbians are somehow able to support the growth of vegetables. And that, again, some kind of scientist somewhere that I've made up, there's all jokes and puns within it, that actually lesbian pheromones are very able to develop the growth of bioproduce. And also I'm positing that the future of bioproducts and vegetables and agriculture can actually be sustained by intensive lesbian farming. And again, this is something that I'm sort of exploring, and here's some visual representations of how that might occur. So very playful, but still posited in this sense of truth, in this sense of history and of science. So here I've wanted to illustrate where I sit in between, in this gap. And for me, humour opposes, in many respects, historical, scientific, documentary, truth-associated narrative content. The context of art and culture assumes this seriousness, and I am hijacking that. I'm hijacking that for the benefit of hopefully a greater cause. And those people who I have hoodwinked might be able to forgive me for that. But this tension and anxiety is what I want to play with between those polarities by performing those things out as an artist, as a photographer, as a video maker. And going from this quote by Adam Kotsko, that radical awkwardness is a panic arising from the collision of different social contexts for which no obvious norm of reconciliation exists. And I think certainly from what we've already heard today, and I'm quite certain we'll hear from the rest of today, that actually this sort of idea of norm and reconciliation and collision of ideas, and I'm not so intelligent that I would love to be able to answer this idea, what is the future and what is this, rethinking of diversity, this reblinking of diversity. I can't give any answers to that, but hopefully what I'm trying to do by moving around in this gap, in this fault line, in the break of this spine, by just exploring and playing and pushing those buttons, by playing those boundaries, I am somehow going to be part of a new way of thinking that will help address all of the issues of otherness, of difference, if that difference is there, but just for us all to find that reconciliation by pushing that collision further. Thank you very much.